So I am Becca Leslie, and I'm about to share more about my practicum. It's been 9 months since I completed my practicum. I did it on an accelerated schedule over the summer last summer, so it's been a little bit of time since I was fully immersed in these concepts, but in fact, since that time, I've become more immersed in a practical way because I have related everything from my practicum directly into what I do in my professional role. So before I dig into that, I'd like to thank all of you for being here. Many of you in the room have offered lots of different kinds of support for many of us who gave presentations today, whether it was moral support or helping out to make sure that we had the time to do what we needed to do. So we are all so grateful to you for being here with us today to celebrate this sort of culmination. And it's also tricky for me to follow those 4 presentations that went before. Nice job, team. I'm proud of you guys. Go team. So I am going to talk to you today about motivating stakeholders to build a campus sustainability movement. And my role is a sustainability coordinator at a boarding school in Gill, Massachusetts called Northfield Mount Hermon. That's a grades 9 through 12 boarding school. And when I came to Northfield Mount Hermon, I was not hired as a sustainability coordinator. I was hired as a teacher and stepped into the role of sustainability coordinator in part because I worked with a couple of other faculty members to convince our administration that sustainability was pretty central to what we do at Northfield Mount Hermon. And so it made sense to make a concrete commitment to that process. So as I started at Northfield Mount Hermon, we're lucky in that our academic departments are pretty nicely integrated. We have really excellent teamwork between our different academic departments, but like we find on many other campuses, the academic world and the operations world and the student world and the parent world and the alumni world all tend to be pretty siloed, pretty isolated from each other, hence our silos up here. And my vision for sustainability coordinator was to build tendrils that would wrap around the silos and pull them closer together and in fact begin a sort of integration of information sharing and process sharing between those silos. And so in my early years coordinating sustainability at Northfield Mount Hermon, I started a number of big initiatives that did exactly that. And can't quite see it because of the lights here, but after a little while, I started to realize that the root of those tendrils that I was forming all came from one spot, and that was my ideas. And so, in fact, I was building a whole new silo right here by only representing my perspective on sustainability. And as we all know, the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. And so to fully integrate sustainability across the curriculum, it needed to get out of my head. And I sort of realized this through the work that we did as a group last year at Antioch. Full integration of sustainability needs to go beyond me. And so my practicum was a perfect opportunity to explore that path into sustainability extending beyond this one person on campus. So this is the toolkit that really served me well last year during our courses that led up to this direction for my practicum. So starting with this idea of adaptive leadership and stepping into that productive zone of disequilibrium where when things are a little bit tricky, a little bit not quite right, that's where the productivity happens. That's where the innovation happens. That's where people are going to start to work together. So that's really important to this work, shifting in a new direction. Also getting on the balcony, the idea of getting on the balcony. So you're stepping away from the triggers and your emotional responses that come with your personal investment in your professional life. Stepping away from that in order to be able to see the patterns that are happening down on the dance floor, right? And see who's interacting with who and in what ways. So that's our adaptive leadership. When we get into conservation psychology, campus communities tend to be somewhat change averse in some ways. In other ways, lots of change happening in campus communities. But in terms of the infrastructure, folks tend to be change averse. And with looking at conservation psychology in our classes last year, we learned about the 6 Americas from a Yale study looking at climate change and how there are 6 different major groups of people that approach climate change with very, very different perceptions of what's happening in our world. And all of those people come to the sustainability table from a different perspective. More recently, I've learned that it's around 30% or less of those people who come to sustainability with an environmental passion, that the triple bottom line is truly integral to pulling in all of your different stakeholders and all of those 6 Americas. The idea of branding, matching the product to consumer needs, organizational learning, diagnostic and strategy tools, and backcasting. So through my practicum, I decided, based on what we had learned about backcasting, it made sense to say, okay, what's my ultimate goal? And then once we've decided on that ultimate goal, how do we build a map to reach that strategic goal? So to build on that foundation during my practicum, I focused on these 4 areas. Fleshed out my understanding of conservation psychology. And then knowledge management is pretty cool, pretty neat. I have huge amounts of data about my school. I've done a lot of auditing of greenhouse gas emissions, of sustainability activities at my school. Starting with that data, how do you figure out what that data means? So translate the data into information. Then once you have figured out what it means, figure out what does it mean within your system. So that's translating information into knowledge. Then, once you know what that information means within your system, how do you use that to guide future planning? And that's taking that knowledge to wisdom. So that was one of my focuses for my practicum. Then translating metrics into motivation and stakeholder engagement. One idea that I really loved that I found in my research was that students will be on campus for a few years. Faculty may be on a campus for a lifetime, but the campus itself will be there forever. And so you need to meet all of those different timelines in terms of looking at your sustainability strategy. So using that as my starting point, I re-examined what we were doing on campus. The current paradigm was to measure and report on sustainability initiatives and act on that measuring and reporting that we found, and act in a piecemeal kind of way, responding to what are the most urgent situations right now. Do I build a groundswell from the student body? Do I build a groundswell from the administrative perspective? And lots of different piecemeal parts coming together. My strategy in my practicum project was to look towards a communicating and collaborating way of working, delegating more, not just being this one-person sustainability coordinator who's measuring and reporting and making things happen. And so the outcome was to build more resilience and succession planning at the same time. If it got outside of my head, then there would be plenty of folks who are prepared to step in if I have a baby. So, my plan was to first identify the groups of stakeholders, and then for each of the stakeholders, figure out how do I orient the newcomers to that group. Once I've oriented the newcomers and we've built sort of a working relationship, how do I identify the leaders in that group who can help to shape future sustainability projects? How do I harness the broad base of existing energy that exists in my campus? And then how do I build a platform for future initiatives and future development of initiatives? With each of those different steps, each of those 4 steps, my practicum was to look very carefully at each of these stakeholder groups and identify what are the characteristics of that stakeholder group. So students are on campus for 4 years. They bring a whole lot of passion and pride to the table, and they have a lot of creativity. So that was the first part. What are the characteristics of that group? Then how do I orient that group, the newcomers in that group, the freshmen or the new sophomores, or new juniors or seniors or postgraduates? How do I orient them to this place and our sustainability, our triple bottom line, and our forward trajectory in this place? Then how do I identify the leaders in that group? How do I... Thank you. Harness their existing energy and then build a platform for the future for that group. So my final practicum project was to do all of those steps, characteristics, and orient newcomers and identify leaders and harness existing energy and build a platform for the future for students, then for faculty, then for our staff, then for our and so on. Since then, of course, things always change on on campuses. Of course, though we're change averse, things will always be changing on campuses. And so over the course of this year, I've really focused in this area of the faculty, staff, administrators, and trustees, and made a lot of progress with my plan for those groups. Next year, students are number one, most important to target that group, and then I'll move into alumni, prospective students, and residents of Gill. So the outcomes from that plan, the plan is what I've just described. And I created an interactive NMH sustainability orientation that's an online interactive quiz kind of tool that would be, that I would roll out in a room where people were sitting together, so I would be available to answer questions around the room. And then my final plan is to do a quadrennial sustainability report in our annual reporting, so that there is regular sharing of information with our community beyond the campus community. And that's what I did. Thank you very much.